Hey guys, Lotus Streams here, and welcome to my guide on how to play Warhammer 40k 8th edition. This is meant to be a complete guide on how to play the game from start to end, and as such may contain things you already might know in case you have played in an older edition and have returned to start once again. But no matter if you're a veteran or a new player looking to get into the hobby, I suggest watching the video in either case because this is nothing like the previous edition and there's barely anything left that you can just carry over and be done with it. As I assume this video will be pretty long, there will be timestamps in the video description so you can pause to play along, take a break or whatever the case may be, and resume at the right spot later. Also helps you out when you think you have a good grasp but you need clarification on a very specific aspect of the game. I will go through the book from start to end, but I will explain profiles and other special interactions as they come up, so you know where to look if the rules require you to search for further information. In this example, I'll be using Space Marines from the Ultramarines chapter as friendly models as my own, and Chaos Space Marine models from the Death Guard chapter as enemy models, just like the starter box and the example turn in the book. I will be using Tabletop Simulator to give you a better visual explanation of what I'm trying to explain. Alright, so let's get started. Warhammer 40k uses inches as a unit of measurement, and it also uses 6-sided dice to determine random events. For example, if you want to roll for movement or advancing or whatever you want, you roll the die. Sometimes it says you should roll a d3. In this case, you just roll, and on a 1 or 2 it's a 1, on a 3 or 4 it's a 2, on a 5 or 6 it's a 3. So that's when it asks you to roll a d6. Any dice that you threw can only be rerolled once without any exceptions. Even if you have multiple rerolls, you can only reroll once and then it's done. There's also sequencing. Warhammer 40k has plenty of rules, and whenever two events happen at the same time, you resolve this by rolling a dice, and the winner decides. If it happens during the game, the player whose turn it is determines the order. This is just meant to help you out just in case there is rules clashing in the timeline. The figurines we use to represent our armies are called models. So this here is a model, this is a model, this is a model, this is a model, and so on. So every time we talking about models, we're talking about specific little guys here on the field. This is also a model, and rules will often ask you to do something with a model. So that's the definition. These models have data sheets that you find within indexes and codices, like over here. This is the data sheet for the librarian, for example. This is the data sheet for the tacticals. On here are a bunch of informations that I will explain when you need to have a look at this. And obviously, these are all individual for each unit or each model that you can use. If a rule tells you to modify a characteristic, always multiply and divide before adding or subtracting. So if the librarian has something that says double his strength, and he also has something that says strength plus 1, for example, if he has an X, you would first double the value to 8 and then add, never the other way around. So just in case the game asks you to modify something, that's how you do it. Models move around the table either alone, as the character over here, which means he's a unit of 1, or they move in groups, which is these 5 guys here. And both of them are called units. To find out how many members a unit has, you can also check the data sheet again. So over here we see a Rhino is a single model. Tacticals would say it's something like you have 1 Sergeant, 4 Space Marines. And the Librarian would say something like he's a single model as well. So there you have it, and you have a pretty simple idea on how many guys are in a unit. Units are important here because they will move as a group. The unit composition informs you about the minimum and maximum size, but if you set up a unit or you finish any sort of move, you have to be within 2 inches with at least one model all the time. So these two guys are fine, these guys are fine, these guys are fine, and this is more than 2 inches. So this guy is not allowed to stay here, he has to come closer. This is called unit coherency, and you have to try to keep it at all times. So just in case you're losing models, for example, these guys just get shot off the table, and the next time you move, you have to try to come closer together. That's always the case. This is meant to be representing that the group cannot break up and is treated as a unit instead of single models. Warhammer 40k is a turn-based game. An entire turn is called a battle round, which consists of 2 player turns. For example, over here we have the counter. So this is battle round number 1, player turn number 1, then the next player, and then the next battle round begins. This is important to note because there's a bunch of abilities that will tell you something like until the next battle round, or until the next player turn, or until the next phase. Each turn is divided into 6 phases per player, and also here we have to look for effects and so on, which specify until which phase of these here do they actually last. The first phase is called the movement phase, which is why we're right over here, and that's where you always start. All your units in your army may move up to their maximum movement stat. In short, it's called M. If you check your data sheet, it will tell you how far. So the Barbarian can move 6, so can the Tactical Squad, and the Rhino might move even longer, like 12 inches. If you want to move, you select a unit, but you have some restriction on how you move. For example, if we move 6 inches straight forward, that's no issue. If we want to get across this wall, for example, we cannot move just through the wall. That doesn't work. If you want to go across this wall, you essentially have to climb it. So you have to go 3 inches up, 3 inches down, and then you can continue to walk. If there's other terrain, it might be different. It will specifically tell you if that terrain has a special interaction, but that's the normal case. Also, if you're moving, you cannot move through your own models, not even in your own unit. So you cannot move into the Rhino or through the Rhino. You have to go around. The other exception is if there's enemy models around, you may never move within 1 inch of them with your normal movement stat. So this is all restricted. So this guy can go maximum here, where he's 1 inch away from these guys, and he does not walk across the Rhino. The second thing is that if you are already within 1 inch of an enemy model, like these guys, you cannot move. It's called a fall back. This means you move your normal 6 inches with the Marines, for example. But if you do so, you cannot advance, shoot, or charge later that turn, which obviously severely hinders your unit's effectiveness. And that's why this 1 inch thing is very important, that you can never move into 1 inch unless you're charging. These units are called fell back, and they have all the restrictions that come into play with that. Whenever you pick a unit and you feel you need extra movement, for example over here, if we want to get to this transport and we need to get across the wall, we can do something that's called advance. So instead of just taking our movement stat, we roll an additional d6, and that's how many additional inches we can move. So these guys can now move 9. So he might move here, over there, and across the wall, for example. The problem with advancing is you cannot shoot or charge later that turn, so you're trading speed for combat effectiveness, yet again, just like with falling back. I already mentioned this here. This is a transport. So if you have a bunch of units, they can try to get inside of the transport and get moved around the field. All models that have the transport word, for example, the Rhino here is noted as a transport, have also a capacity. So in this case, we can transport 10 models maximum. It doesn't matter how many units embark into it, you just can't go over the maximum. To get inside of a vehicle, we call that embarking, you have to end your move within 3 inches of this Rhino. So if the entire unit is within 3 inches, like so, they can embark within it, and embarked units are removed from the battlefield. So you just set them aside and mark them as being in here. And they are not affected in any way while they remain embarked. So they cannot shoot, they don't profit from any rules outside, and so on. Any unit that begins its movement phase embarked within a transport can disembark before the transport moves. So let's assume we're in the next round. Then these guys can disembark, and yet again they have to stay within 3 inches of the transport, and then they may disembark as normal. But again, the transport cannot move for that to happen. If he moved already, these guys may not disembark. The unit is brought back to the battlefields, and they all have to remain within 3 inches. And also, as I already said, you cannot embark into 1 inch of an enemy model yet again, because it is pretty much like a move. Although these guys here can act absolutely normal in their turn. They move normal, they shoot normal, nothing happens by disembarking, just the 3-inch extra move. The other thing is, if there is too many models around, so you can't disembark properly, every model that can't get out counts as being destroyed. So be very careful where you're trying to disembark. If you can't make it, then you will lose models. The other thing is, if the transport is destroyed while transporting a unit, for example, these Marines kill this Rhino, you immediately disembark, as I already did. Then you remove the transport, and every single unit that disembarked has to take equal as many dice to their model count, roll, and on a roll of 1, a model of your choice is slain. You don't roll individually, you roll for all of them at the same time. And for example, this guy has a special weapon, so we don't want to remove him, but we have to remove one of these guys, and he's killed. So staying inside of transports while they're getting damaged might be pretty dangerous for you. Since scenery and terrain features might cause your models to be unstable, there's a general rule called wobbly model syndrome, and you and your opponent can agree to use a marker of some sort to show where the model is supposed to be to prevent damage or maintain clarity. So for example, this land speeder wants to stay on top of here, but he doesn't stay here, it wants to stay on the very corner. And as you can see, he will fall off, and that will damage your models. So instead we can try to put a die here or something so we know where his outer base is supposed to be, and then we can just put him aside. Whenever you're trying to measure something to the model from your enemy or anything like that, you can put it back and hold it in place until he did his measuring. The last thing that can happen at the end of the movement phase is reinforcements. If a unit has an ability on its data sheet that allows them to move around the battlefield with something like teleportation, this usually happens instead of moving the model and placing it on the table. So for example, if we look to the data sheet for the assault squad, these guys have jump pack assault, so they can be put into reserves. And then at the end of the movement phase, they jump in here, anywhere on the battlefield with the restriction applied, and they do not get to move. This is essentially their move by coming onto the battlefield. That is all that can happen in the movement phase. The second phase is called psychic phase. Psychic phase is a little bit different because if your model is not noted being a Psyker, you don't do anything with him there. If he is a Psyker on his manifest, you may try to manifest a psychic power. These you get to choose before the first battle round, and which and how many you are noted on the datasheet. So the librarian over here is a Psyker. As you can see, he has the keyword Psyker, and it tells us here that he can try to manifest 2 psychic powers maximum in each psychic phase, and he can also deny 1 power. And he also tells us which powers he has and on which page in the book it is. Right, so here's our librarian. To manifest a power, you must beat the warp charge value, which will be noted on the power. For example, Smite has a warp charge value of 5. In this case, you roll 2d6, and if the total is equal or higher than the warp charge value, the power could be successfully manifested. So if we roll here, we take two dice. As you can see, 8 is higher than 5, so the power is successfully manifested for now. The problem with magic is it's pretty dangerous to play around with that. So there is perils of the warp. Whenever this test goes to a double 1 or double 6, the Psyker suffers D3 mortal wounds, which is really dangerous. And if this even kills him, he fails to cast the psychic power, and each unit within 6 inches immediately suffers D3 mortal wounds. So this is pretty dangerous. The lower the Psyker gets, the more likely it is that he gets slain by Pearls of the Warp. And it's a pretty low chance, but it's still there. And that's something you should look out for when you're trying to cast powers. After this, you are looking if the enemy has a Psyker of his own, or a model that has an ability noted on the datasheet within 24 inches of the caster. He can deny the witch. So this sorcerer is in range within 24 inches, and he can try to deny the witch, which is exact same as the psychic test, except he has to beat the 8 that the librarian rolled. So he also rolls his 2d6. As you can see, I have a 9, so I successfully would deny the witch, and the power does not go off. If you beat the warp charge value and didn't die to Pearls of the Warp, and the enemy didn't deny the witch, you resolve the effect as noted on the power. So for example, with Smite, we would get the closest visible enemy unit with an 18, and he would suffer D3 mortal wounds. In this case, he would suffer 3 if it wasn't denied. And that's all about the psychic phase, because everything else is noted on the datasheet or on the power itself. The third phase is the shooting phase. As you can see, there's a bunch of stuff here, but it's pretty easy if you get used to it. Just like the movement phase, every unit in your army may choose to shoot if they want to, and if they can do so. First, you need to check if the unit possesses ranged weapons. So for example, we are looking at our tactical marines yet again. We go to their data sheet, and as you can see, tacticals are equipped with bolt gun, bolt pistols, frag grenades, crack grenades, and these are ranged weapons, so we have something to shoot with. The next thing we do is we see if we are in range, because as you stated, if it's a ranged weapon, it has a range of X, and we can start the shooting sequence. As mentioned before, you cannot pick units that advanced or fell back this turn, but also units that are within 1 inch of an enemy model. So, for example, these guys fell back out of combat, so they may not shoot right now. These guys here are in close combat, so they can't fire at something else or anything. They have to have a special rule that allows them to do so. The next thing is you choose your targets. There's a bunch of restrictions to this, and it is done on a model-to-model basis. First of all, what can't be seen can't be shot. So for example, this guy here does not have line of sight to this guy, and as such he cannot target him, even if he wanted to. If you want to see line of sight, you could just go down behind your model and you check the actual line of sight if we have any contact to the body, and as you can see, we cannot see anything from the Chaos Space Marine there, and as such he cannot be chosen as a target. Um, the only exception is that each model can see other models in its own unit. So for example, this guy here might get blocked by his teammates. Can he see the Chaos Marine? As you can see, just barely. But since this is his own unit, he ignores these guys here. So the true vision would be look something like this. And as you can see, he has clear line of sight now, and he is able to target that guy. But note, this is only for a unit. This is not for a different unit. Different units can block line of sight by being in the way. The next thing is, last but not least, every single model in the unit can fire all weapon it has at any viable target unit as long as they are in range. The range is noted as we saw before on the datasheet, and you must declare all targets, weapons, and splits for your unit at the same time and resolve them per target. So for example, I can choose this guy is shooting this guy. This guy is shooting this guy, and these two guys are shooting these two guys. We just have to declare it before, and then we roll. And we do not just switch from model per model, but if these two guys are noted as attacking these guys, we have to resolve them both before going to the next target. If you shoot a ranged weapon, the profile will tell you both a weapon type and the amount of shots you get from the weapon. These shots themselves cannot be split up, so you can choose different targets, but you cannot split the shots itself. The only weapon type that will interact with the amount of shots you get is called rapid fire. So for example, if we look over here, the tactical squad have bolt guns. It's noted that it's rapid fire 1. So if we go back to our marine who has a bolt gun, this guy here, as long as you are within half range, which is 12 inches for this weapon, you get double the shots. So you get 2 shots instead of 1. If they are outside of 12 inches, you just get your 1 shot as usual and noted on the profile. The attacks noted on the profile always get doubled within half range. Assault weapons do not interact with the normal shooting, but circumvent the advanced ruling and allow you to shoot at the target with -1 to your hit rolls. So for example, this guy here did move and also advanced, and he still gets to fire his flamer since his flamer is an assault weapon at these guys. He gets -1 to hit, but in the end we got additional movement and trade off for a little bit weaker shooting. Heavy weapons also give you a -1 to your hit rolls, but those are only if you moved at all. If this guy has the last cannon, which is a heavy weapon, and he does not move, he shoots as normal and nothing is applied. It just says heavy 1 and you shoot. If he moved in the movement phase, he subtracts 1 from his ballistic skill and to hit roll. The last things are very special. There is grenades on squads sometimes. So for example, the tactical squad says every single unit has frag and crack grenades. As I already said, you can fire all weapons as you like. You are not limited, but grenades have a special rule that say one guy in the squad can throw a grenade and he may not fire anything else. So if this guy decides to throw a crack grenade, he may not fire his bolt pistol or bolt gun at all. So one of these guys can toss a grenade. And then last but not least, we got pistols. Pistols work very similar. You either shoot all of your normal weapons or all pistols, but never a mix of both. So this guy here is trying to shoot his pistol into this guy, but he may not do so with his bolt gun as well. You have to choose all pistols or all other weapon types. Pistols can also be fired in the shooting phase if there's enemy models within 1 inch, which is usually preventing you from shooting units entirely. So for example, these guys here are close combat with this guy within 1 inch, so they may not shoot with any weapon, but they are equipped with pistols, so they can shoot this guy. If you're shooting in this combat, you always have to target the closest enemy unit. Also, you cannot fire into any combat where friendly models involved, and in this case pistols make an exception. So even if this guy is in combat with him and this guy too, he may still fire his pistol at him. It does not invalidate his targeting. So pistols can be fired in close combat pretty much. Then resolving the shooting attacks goes as following. First, you need to roll to hit. This stat is called ballistic skill. So if we go back to the profile, we can see the tactical squad has a ballistic skill of 3+. So to get a hit, they have to roll a d6. For example, our rapid fire guy gets 2 shots because he's in half range. And then he has to get a 3+. So this one hits, this one misses. And that's what this is all about. So if the heavy weapon moves, he hits on 3s. If the heavy weapon, if he stands still, if he moves, he hits on 4s. If this guy has advanced this turn, he also would hit on 4s. Every other weapon is just using the more normal ballistic skill. Now you add modifiers like all of these that I just mentioned, and you roll. And if the roll is equal or greater than ballistic skill, you score a hit. But a roll of 1 always fails. It's impossible to hit automatically due to ballistic skill. Next one is the wound roll. First of all, we check our weapons profile yet again. So the bolt gun has a weapon strength of 4. This weapon strength is compared to the toughness of the target that you're shooting at. And in this case, these guys are also toughness 4. The comparison of these two has a special table, which is over here. So if it's equal, you need a 4+ to wound. So in this case, we had 2 hits, and now we need 4s to wound. So these are 2 successful wound rolls. If our strength is higher, we need a 3+, and if our strength is double as high, we only need a 2+ to wound. So this last cannon is strength 9, and if shooting at the Chaos Marines, it obviously has more than double even, so it wounds on a 2+. If we are tossing a grenade, for example, a frag grenade, it's only strength 3, so it's lower, and we wound on a 5+, and if it's half the toughness or lower, it's on a 6+, not a 2+, 6. So pretty simple table, goes in both directions, and you always compare strength of the weapon you're shooting with against toughness. After this, we have wounds. So for example, these guys took 2 wounds. The first thing we do is we allocate wounds. The player controlling this unit allocates the wound to a model in the unit, and it can be any model. He has free choice unless the model has multiple wounds and is already wounded. In that case, he has to allocate wounds to the said model until it's dead. So I now can decide, alright, I'm going to take these wounds on this guy, or this guy. After the wound allocation, the controlling player makes a single saving throw. Unless it's a mortal wound, in which case he doesn't get any saving throws. Remember, mortal wounds are something like caused by smite. So this guy would not get an armor save against that. You check your unit's profile yet again for the save characteristics. So if we check our profile back here, you see the save as V 3+, and as the Chaos Marines over here also have a 3+ save. Now you combine this with the subtract the AP, aka the armor penetration from the save. So for example, in this case, a bolt gun has AP 0, so we will subtract nothing from the 3+ save. If the AP was, for example, -1, we subtract 1 from the save and it will become a 4+. So the higher the AP, the better you get to penetrate the armor. So these guys will roll their saves, and as you can see, they both pass on a 3+, because the bolt gun does not have any AP in this example. If you have an invulnerable save noted on your data sheet, also compare this to the modified saving throw. If it is higher, use this value instead, as invulnerable saves cannot get modified by AP in any way. So if we look over here, You see there is no invuln saves here noted, neither is here, and neither is here. So all of these would always use their armor saves, even though they might get ignored. If they had one, you would compare it and take the highest one. You may never take more than one save, though, as I already mentioned. There's only one exception to this. The invulnerable saves also get ignored by mortal wounds. The armor save can further be modified by cover, but only if the wounds are caused outside of the fight phase, so aka when you're shooting or with psychic powers and so on. So if the entire unit is in cover, like this guy, he gets +1 to his saving throw. So he would have a 2+ against these guys, because his normal armor save is a 3+, and since he's entirely in cover, he gets +1 to this. The last is the infliction of damage. Over here, you can see the last part here is bolt guns have a damage of 1, crack grenade have a damage of d3, and last cannons and so on can have even more. As you can see, damage is a very important stat in the end. So in this case, let's assume one of these guys failed his armor save by rolling a 2. And each model suffers 1 wound per point of inflicted damage. So in this case, the damage would be 1. So this model would take 1 damage. If the model's wounds reach 0 due to sufficient damage, that model is slain and the remaining damage is lost. So for example, this guy has 1 wound, as you can see in the profile yet again. You check his wound profile and there's only 1 wound, so he is removed. So even if I dealt 60 damage to him, he would just die, nobody else would die. It does not get over to other units. The only exceptions to this is, yet again, mortal wounds. If there's 2 guys in here and we get a 2 for mortal wounds, both of these guys would die. The wounds carry over, but this is the only exception. All other damage cannot be transferred to other models. The normal damage can literally overkill models this way, so you have to see what kind of upgrade you want. And that is all for shooting. The 4th phase is the charge phase, and it's very, very short compared to other ones because it's heavily bound with the fight phase. They might be called sub-phases in all. Any of your units within 12 inches of an enemy model may declare a charge move. So for example, this tactical squad is within 12 inches of the cultists and may declare a charge this turn. Note though that this does not allow you to declare charges longer than 12 inches, even if your model have the ability to go further. So let's assume, just for fun, that these guys here would get a modifier to their charge roll. They would roll 3d6, for example. That would mean they could go 18, but they can still only declare a charge if they are within 12. So for example, this Defiler is not within 12, so we cannot declare a charge against him, no matter how far we can actually go. As before, you cannot declare charges with a unit that advanced, fell back, or is already within 1 inch of a model. So this guy cannot charge somebody else because he's already bound in close combat. Now select as many enemy units as you want and declare them as desired targets. The downside of this is that each unit gets to fire Overwatch, which will hurt you, but if you do not declare them as targets, you will be unable to damage them in the fight phase. So for example, this tactical squad is in range of this one and will declare a charge against the cultist squad, which is charge number 1. And then they will declare a charge against these guys, which is charge number 2. But they will not declare a charge against this guy, even though they could. And they cannot declare a charge against that guy because he's too far away. So after this, every time such a charge is declared, the targeted units can fire Overwatch, unless there's an enemy model within 1 inches. So this guy could not fire Overwatch, but these two can. They were targeted by the charges, and this is why they get to fire Overwatch. Even if this guy would get targeted, he still could not fire. Overwatch is resolved exactly like a normal shooting attack that I explained before, except the ability skill and any modifiers do not get accounted for. Instead, a 6 is always necessary to hit successfully. So these guys here, for example, have pistols, and we would fire, and since it's Overwatch, we need 6s to hit. As you can see, we scored 2 hits, but it's much harder to hit on Overwatch. But we resolve these as normal in the shooting attack, so we see if those wounds, this one wounds, an armor save, 1 Marine would die. This is very important because this might actually get you out of charge range. But then again, we can allocate these wounds as we want, so this guy dies instead. It's exactly the same as if shooting, just with worse ballistic skill. Then these guys would also get to fire Overwatch. And after all Overwatch is done, you roll 2d6 with the charging squad. In this case, we rolled as 3. Now, each model in the charging unit can move up to this number of inches, and the first model must finish within 1 inch of an enemy model from any of the target units. So, as we can see, 3 inches is not enough. We can't get further here. So in this case, we would fail the charge. Let's assume we rolled a 11, or in this case, let's say a 12, or we were closer. We would make the charge. So we have to get one of our models has to charge either this guy or this guy. Everybody else has a free 12-inch movement. There's no requirement to go anywhere. You can actually go this way if you want to. The only thing that you have to maintain, as I said always, unit currency. That's the only thing that limits you from doing stuff. There's also another limit. If you did not declare this target as a charge target, you have to stay 1 inch away from him. So we cannot charge into here because we did not declare the charge. So let's move him about here, still within 2 inches of unit currency, and that's what it looks like after the charge. The following phase is called the fight phase. So these guys are all now within 1 inch, or they charged at some point. And the next thing we do is we fight. The restriction is any unit that charged or has models within 1 inches of an enemy unit can be chosen to fight for both sides. So all units that have charged this turn fight first, and the player whose turn it is chooses the order. So as we can see, this guy did not charge, so he does not go first now. These guys did all charge, so these will do their combat first. After all guys have fought that charge this turn, you fight with the other remaining guys, and the player whose turn it is starts by picking the unit. So this guy, even though he did not charge, can still attack this guy before, because it is my turn right now and I can choose to go first. And after that, you alternate between the players. So then the Chaos Marines would go, then another one would go, then this go, until all the stuff is resolved. Each fight is resolved in the following steps. Each model may move up to 3 inches in any direction so long as the chosen model ends the move closer to the nearest enemy model. Note that does not have to be a unit you have declared a charge against. And this is called the pile-in move. For example, this guy here is not can move closer, but he could also do something like this. Because this is the closest enemy model, and technically his base is now closer than before, because there was a little part here that was not done. So this is totally fine as long as he maintains unit currency. And this guy here is within this range and within this range. So he can also try to pile into this guy, because if they're equal distant, you can choose whatever you want to. Now note, we did not declare a charge against the defiler because we couldn't, but when using our pile in or consolidate move, we can try to drag other units into close combat. The only problem with this is we cannot attack him. As I already said, if you didn't declare a charge against the target unit, you cannot attack it no matter what. So this guy still has to attack one of these groups here. The next is you choose your targets. This is done on a model per model basis, and any model may attack an enemy unit that is within 1 inch of it, or it is within 1 inch of somebody of its own unit who is within 1 inch. So for example, this guy is within 1 inch of this one, but he can't attack it, but he's also within 1 inch of the cultists, so he may attack the cultists. These two guys can also attack the cultists. This guy here can attack these Chaos Marines or this Chaos Burst Marine. Everybody can declare their own target as they want to, no problem. But if we, for example, had another guy here, now he's not within 1 inch, and he's not within one of his own unit who is within 1 inch, so he may not attack this turn. Okay, so it's only inside of the unit that this goes. This is essentially made to have a 2-rank system. So 2 ranks of Marines would get to fight, because this is within 1, and this guy here is within 1 of somebody who is within 1. That's the idea. Other than shooting attacks, models equipped with melee weapons can divide their attacks between units and can also use whatever weapon profile they want to. So let's go back to the sheet, and we can see the attack characteristic is what we use now, instead of the type and the amount of shots. But for example, if a Space Marine Sergeant has 2 attacks, he can divide these however he wants to, and if he has multiple close combat weapons, he can also use 1 axe attack, 1 sword attack, it doesn't matter. He can split them up however he wants to. So for example, this guy here could choose to attack 1 here and 1 here if he wants to. Other than the shooting weapons, models equipped with no melee weapons still get to do their attacks with the profile. Close combat weapon, range melee, melee, strength user, AP dash, damage 1. So in this case, we would go into our profile and we see Space Marines here in this case do not have any melee weapons. Otherwise, it would say something like this: range melee, type melee. In this case, we use the standard profile, so we check their strength, and their base strength is 4, so we use this one, and this would inflict 1 damage each. So for example, this guy we assume is a sergeant, so he has 2 attacks. He wants to put 1 attack onto this squad and 1 attack onto this squad. And now we have to determine how does he hit. In this case, we do not use ballistic skill, we use weapon skill. Weapon skill is essentially the equivalent to ballistic skill and also gets modified and so on and so forth. So we would try to hit on a 3, and then again we compare our strength of our combat weapon or our own fists to the toughness of 4, so we need force to wound. We failed, then attacks here and misses, because he needs a 3+ to hit. So in the end, this process is the same as in the shooting phase, and with the exception that he used the model's weapon skill plus eventual modifiers instead of ballistic skill. You have to declare the split and resolve all attacks against 1 target before moving on to the next. So if, for example, we had more guys here, we have to declare this guy is going to split between this, and then we roll all of these attacks against the unit, and then we go to this unit and attack with these 2 guys. Now, if we're done with that, each model that has fought here yet again gets to move up to 3 inches in any direction as long as the model ends the move closer to the nearest enemy model, and this time it's called a consolidate move, but it's the exact same thing as a pile-in, but they have to have different names so we know the first thing is happening before the fighting and the other one is after the fighting. So in this case, for example, this guy here can move a tiny bit closer, but he cannot pile around or something because this is the closest enemy model. This guy here has a choice. He can pile into here or here, and it's a may move, so he doesn't have to pile in. Remember this, consolidating and pile in moves do not have to be done. Only if you think it's gonna be advantageous for you. So for example, if you move like this is fine. This is closer to the model than before, and that's it. The direction is not in any way relevant, just the distance from this to this base. This has to get smaller. Now, there is some special interactions here. So for example, let's assume these assault marines here would have barely made the charge. And then this guy fights and kills them before they get to do anything. What happens then? Now we go back to the ruling. All units that charged or are within 1 inch do the fighting move. So these guys here, although they're not within 1 inch, they did declare a charge this turn. So they pile in their 3 inches to the closest enemy model. And they also consolidate because they just skip the entire fighting phase since they're not within 1 inch. So these guys can do another move. So what's important is, remember which units declared a charge. They will make something happen in the charging phase. Even if they can't attack anything, they will still move their pile in and their consolidation. Now that this is done, then the other side would get to attack. And even the Defiler gets to attack. I don't get to attack him, but since he's now within 1 inch, you fight. It's a very simple system. As long as somebody went into 1 inch, you fight with them. Each model obviously can only fight once per phase. Never more than that. The last phase is called the morale phase, and as you can see, it's nowhere here to be found. The morale phase is a very simple one, and it can go all across the other phases because you have to keep track of casualties. Both players must take all remaining morale test rolls, starting with the current player. Each unit that has lost any number of models rolls a d6 and adds the total number of models lost. So for example, let's assume we fired into the squad and we killed 1 Marine. Then these guys here would roll a d6. 3 plus 1 for 1 loss is 4. And is this lower than their or equal to their leadership? Yes, it is. Then they don't lose any models. If we assume they lost 10 models and we roll, we have an 11. We compare that 11 to their leadership, which is 8. In this case, they take 3 wounds. They don't take 3 wounds, they lose 3 models. It doesn't matter how many wounds the model has, you just lose 3 models straight up. They flee from the battlefield. So the more casualties you take, the more dangerous it becomes. This does not limit itself to shooting phase. Also, if you lose something in the psychic phase or charge phase, doesn't matter. At the end of the turn, you always check on both sides who lost models. Wounds are irrelevant. It's only the loss of a model that triggers the morale phase. Wounding is not relevant anymore when determining whether or not they have to take morale tests. These are all the phases, and once each player goes through all of them, a new battle round begins. So now we had the chaos turn. We do the same thing. We would move. We would do psychic if we can, shooting, charging, fighting, morale, and that's it. And then we would move on to battle round number 2. The entire phases are done with, but there are 2 big exceptions to these core rules that I just explained that some models might have noted on their datasheet, and I'll go over them separately here because this is easier for you to handle because you now know what that means. The first thing I want to explain is characters. So if we look to the librarian's datasheet, we see he is a character noted down here. For example, the tactical squad does not contain any characters, and neither does the Rhino. If this model is a character, he has some special rules. For example, in this example, we were choosing our ranged weapons targets. And here's a character from the Chaos side. However, even if I am in range of him, I cannot shoot him unless he's the closest visible model to this unit. This is meant to be protecting them. This does not apply if he has 10 wounds or more, because he's just too big to hide or anything. And other than that, you may not choose them as a target at all. The other thing is, they can also perform a heroic intervention. So after the enemy has completed all their charges, like here, you can choose a character, which is this guy, and he can make a 3-inch move as long as he moves closer to this fight. So this guy could try to pile in, essentially, and fight in this fight. So this is not called a pile-in or anything, it's just an heroic intervention, but it has the exact same rules as the pile-in and the consolidate move. And he does not need to roll for a charge. It looks like a counter charge, but it is not a charge by any means. The other special rule is fly. Some units have fly in their profile. For example, the assault squad does have jump packs and so on, but it has to note fly down here in order to get that. As you can see here, if the entire unit takes jump packs, they gain jump pack and fly keywords. So since these guys have jump packs, they have fly. But for example, the land speeder has fly, and also the airplane here also has fly. Now fly is a keyword that allows these models to move across models and terrain as if they did not exist. So for example, if I go back to my example from the beginning, these Marines do not get to go through the Rhino, but the assault Marines do. They can do a move through the Rhino over to the other side. They can also move over these guys as long as they don't end their move within 1. That applies still. They can also move across ruins and so on. So they're way faster. The other thing is flying units might have a 2 movement speed characteristic. So as you can see over here, these guys always have 1 movement. But if you're looking for flyers, for example, they might have a minimum and a maximum move. So if the minimum moves, for example, is 20 inches, then this flyer has to move 20. And if he cannot do that, or if it takes him off the board, he's immediately destroyed. So you have to be very careful with flyers and so on, so they always can do their thing in case they have a minimum movement speed. This only applies to stuff that can fly, but not all flyers have this rule. It depends if they have 2 movement stats or not. And then the last but not least, I already told you, if these guys here left the combat and fell back, they may not shoot. Flying units are an exception to this. So let's say the assault marines charged here last turn, and they move their movement by falling back. They can still fire their bolt pistols and grenades and everything into this squad. So flying units like this one, for example, if he's bound in close combat, he just gets to fall back and move away, and then he can fire his weapon. They can still not advance or charge their turn, but they circumvent the shooting restriction. But these are the only 2 special types that are mentioned in the rulebook. Everything else is on the data sheet, and it will tell you what kind of exception it is. So it is not a game rule. Now, what's missing here is the game length, the victory conditions, and the choice of models, because how the hell do we know what kind of models we have? I will explain here the most common variant to play. It's match play. First of all, both of you decide the first 2, which are decided by the mission. So for example, there are 2 mission types, Eternal War and Maelstrom of War. You can either agree on one type or roll off, and whoever wins chooses the type. And then next you can either choose or randomly determine one of the 6 missions, and you find the appropriate mission in the rulebook and follow the instructions there. I will make another video about this when the time comes and explain the missions. But there is something common in all missions, which is first of all mission objective markers. So for example, this can be used as an objective marker, and it will determine how many points you score in the game and if you are victorious or not. So for example, we can put that one down here, and then this would become a objective marker. But also this could also be an objective. It doesn't have to be round or something, because if you measure from and to the objective marker, you always measure from the middle, from this here. This enables you to take any objective marker that you want. Even this tank can be an objective as long as only there's a point in the middle that determines where the objective actually is. And we measure from here to here. So you're not holding the tank as an objective if you're here. The other thing is sudden death. Sudden death is always a victory condition in these missions. If at the end of any turn after the first battle round, one player has no models on the battlefield, the opponent automatically wins. And fortifications do not count. So as you can see, we are now in turn 2, so battle round 2. And player turn 2, if the Space Marine would be to wipe out all of these Chaos units in this turn, he would just automatically win the game, even if there's still reinforcements and so on. These do not count for being on the board. Match play also has 3 special rules that change the core rules for the sake of the game balance and fairness. So for example, the first one is Psychic Focus. So except this Might Psychic Power that we have here, each Psychic Power can only be attempted once per turn. That limits the use of taking tons of librarians and then trying to cast everything every time. In this case, all of these could cast Smite if they want to, but they can, or between all of them, you can only use the 3 Psychic Powers per turn. The next thing is Strategic Discipline. The same stratagem cannot be used by the same player more than once during each single phase, not including stratagems that are outside any phase. This is something that is decided when you're making your army, and I'll go over the stratagems when it's time. And the last thing is Tactical Reserves. When you're setting up your army during deployment, at least half the total number of units in your army must be set up on the battlefield. So for example, if we were to take only Assault Marines when we make our army, we can put them all in reinforcements, but half of the units in your army have to be on the board. So you cannot put everything in reserve and drop it down, because that would be unfair, because you essentially circumvent an entire turn of shooting. So this is not allowed in matched play. And that's it. That are the 3 restrictions. The other stuff is entirely based on the Battle-Forged Army concept. All match play missions will require to bring a Battle-Forged Army, and a Battle-Forged Army is very simple. All units that you choose must be organized in so-called detachments. For example, if we look over here, you can see there is different slots here, and all of these units have to fit in one of these slots. If they don't, you cannot take them. These detachments are in the main rulebook, and so far they all have the same requirement. You have to share a faction. So for example, if we're saying, okay, we want to take some Assault Marines, that's fine. We want to take a Land Speeder, that's also fine, but we cannot take Chaos Space Marines. Why not? If we check the faction keywords, our faction keyword is, for example, Imperium Adeptus Astartes, and over here is also Imperium Adeptus Astartes. So we share keyword, we can take them. Now, the Death Guard units here do have the faction Chaos, and Traitor Adeptus Astartes or something like that. So these guys cannot be included in the detachment. If you look into the rulebook, you can also see that you need a battle role. The battle role is also noted on your datasheet over here. This is, for example, is a dedicated transport. This is a troop. This is a HQ. And that way you can find out where which one goes. So if we take these, for example, we have the tactical squads and troops, the librarian in HQ, and the assault squad in fast attack. The detachments will tell you how much of these units you have to bring and how many you can bring. You choose whatever detachment fits your needs the most, and if you look into the rulebook, you have some choices there. And although detachments are technically unlimited, I highly recommend limiting yourself to 2 to 4 per army, depending on point levels to maintain game balance and fairness. Across all detachments, you need to have at least one faction in common, and detachments give you command benefits. In the main rulebook, they are called command points. Just bringing a battle-forged army, so if everything in your army fits inside of these things and inside of detachments, you already get 3 command points, and you add the awarded points for your detachments to those. And these points you can call on so-called stratagems that are already mentioned before, and 3 of them are always available, but others may be used depending on the mission you are playing. The first one is a command reroll. It costs you 1 command point, and you can reroll any single dice. So for shooting, for casting psychic powers, for charging, very, very useful trait to have. The second one is counter-offensive. 2 command points, and after an enemy unit that charge has fought, you select one of your own eligible units and fight with it next. So for example, in this example here, all of these units charged. So all the chaos units get to go last. So instead we can use 2 command points and immediately choose a unit and fight directly after a unit has fought. So essentially we're trying to deal damage before we die and trying to circumvent the charge special rule that will just wipe us out if we're unlucky. And the last one is Insane Bravery. 2 command points, instead of rolling, automatically pass a morale test. So in this example, if these guys were to lose 10 models, and you're like, that is pretty high. If I roll the die, it might be 16, and then the entire squad is wiped. So instead, I will use 2 command points, and instead of rolling for morale, I automatically pass and do not take any casualties for morale. And that's all of them. That's three of the available traits. Everything else is determined by the mission. There's additional ones in there, but nothing special otherwise. The last thing you have to declare is every army has 1 warlord. You choose any model to become your warlord, but if you choose a character, for example, in this case, like the librarian, he also gets a warlord trait. The warlord trait is something you can choose before the game starts, and it will buff your commander or units around him. The first one is Legendary Fighter, so the warlord gains +1 attack for the fight phase if he charged this turn. The second one is Inspiring Leader. All friendly units within 6 inches add +1 to their leadership, so makes them more resilient against morale tests. And Tenacious Survivor. Roll a d6 every time your warlord loses a wound, and on a 6 plot he doesn't. That even works against mortal wounds, because this is already assuming that a wound is dealt. So this does not count as a save. And this is all you need to play Warhammer 40k. But for clarity purposes, I'm gonna outline you the process of playing a game. So first of all, you and your opponent agree on playing match play, a certain point, and a detachment limit. For example, if you're gonna play 1850 points of models, you say, okay, we want to have, let's say, 3 detachments. We don't need more than that. Then you both create battle-forged armies to the agreed limitations. So you try to put them inside of the detachments, and if everything fits, you're fine. And then you add up the points together, and they should never exceed the limit that you two have chosen. These models here have data sheets, and at the end of the codex or index book you have a list of point costs that you can just add together, and there's a bunch of programs like Battlescribe and others that will help you out with just doing the math and doing the right restrictions. As the time continues, these programs get released, and 8th edition is still pretty young, so keep an eye out for that. It will help you much. After this, when the game actually starts, you use a 6x4 table. For example, this one here is 6x4. This is appropriate for up to 2,000 points, for example. If you play more than this, you might obviously use a bigger table. You set up the terrain. So, for example, a ruin, barbed wire, barricades, bunkers, whatever you want to. It is supposed to be looking good. That's the idea here. And also, these things here might interact with your stuff. If you look into the rulebook, you can use terrain rules. And if so, you agree with your opponent what's what. For example, you agree this is a ruin and it gives you +1 to your saves if you're inside of it. Or this is barbed wire, you cannot cross it. Tank traps, you cannot cross them with vehicles, but that's all something you can talk about with your opponent. You don't have to play with this. You just agree on something. Then you roll or simply agree upon the mission, if you don't like rolling. You generate psychic powers and warlord traits. So you just choose one. You have a look into your profile of your librarian and choose your psychic powers. So this is not done in the army creation. This is done right before the game starts. And after that, you set up the mission markers as described in the mission. For example, if the mission says you need 4 of them, then you place them in the order that the mission tells you on the battlefield. And you follow the instructions of the mission. It's very clear what's what the victory condition is and so on. And I'll talk about the specific missions in a different video because obviously that will make this even longer. And you don't actually need this to play Warhammer because you can make your own missions if you want to. There's no limitations to what you can do. This is just to give an overview how the usual way is that you get a game in with a friend of yours or some stranger. It doesn't matter. It's I always recommend agreeing on stuff with your opponent. There's a lot of rules here. There's rule conflict and so on. And if the usual rules or the sequencing rule does not help you out, you can always choose to roll off. And if not, the player whose turn it is decides what you use and so on. So you have to talk about it. It's a communication-based game after all. And that's it. So I hope you find this useful. It is a complete summary of the core rules. Obviously, there's still indexes and all that stuff that I will review in different videos if you're interested in that. But other than that, it's pretty clear what you can do, and everything else is explained on the data sheet. So there's a ton of new special rules, as you can see here, but those are all explained on the data sheet or in the codex itself, and do not require you to know them right away. You have to look after that. These core rules, although, apply to all armies, and no matter what is on your data sheet, you have to be aware that these keyword exists and what they mean. All right, that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed, and happy wargaming.